Hello everyone and welcome back to the Learning Highway. This is the second video of my Understanding Evolution series. In the first video, we covered the fundamental mechanisms and genetics that drive evolution. You might want to check that out if you haven't already, because this video builds on the content from that first video. It's linked in the description. But in this video, we'll be learning about how evolution actually works in the real world. Okay, so individuals in the population are born with some mutations, right? A mutation in a certain gene is called an allele. The good ones survive and spread, as the individuals which carry them have a higher chance of reproduction, and the bad ones die out, as you learned in the previous video. But the important thing to remember is that environments change. What was a good allele 1,000 years ago might not be so good now, and it's not just environments changing. Other populations of living things evolve as well. For example, plant-eating beetles might evolve toxin defenses if the plants that they eat evolve toxins. All these changes in a population's environment, living or non-living, are the main reason for the stunning diversity and complexity of life we see on Earth today. Also, a trait may stick around even if it doesn't provide a specific survival advantage. Most male mammals have nipples. Also, a trait may stick around even if it doesn't provide a specific survival advantage. Most male mammals have nipples, for instance, but they're useless. Why hasn't evolution gotten rid of them? Remember selection pressure from the last video? Since nipples only cost a bit of tissue, male mammals without nipples don't have much of an advantage. So the selection pressure to remove nipples is very low. Alright, let's learn about some processes of evolution now. A bottleneck event is when a population size is severely reduced. Since a smaller population would contain less genetic diversity than a larger one, when the population size bounces back, the population contains less genetic diversity than before, because many of the alleles present in the previous larger population were lost. It will take some time for those alleles to come back again. Because of this, a bottleneck event can slow down the evolution of a population. Sometimes evolution happens simply by random chance. It's called genetic drift when that happens. Genetic drift can make alleles more or less frequent over time, just because of luck and chance. Genetic drift usually doesn't change the population that much, and it usually doesn't damage the population. If that happened, selection pressure would kick in and eliminate the bad alleles. But both genetic drift and bottleneck events are processes that only take place on a small scale, within a certain species. If we want to understand evolution on a large scale, we need to look at an important concept, speciation. Speciation is the process that species give rise to new species. There are two types of it, anagenesis and cladogenesis. Anagenesis is when a species directly becomes a new species as it adapts and accumulates mutations. For example, the ape Australopithecus amanensis, which lived a few million years ago in Africa, evolved into Australopithecus afarensis. Cladogenesis is much more common though, and it is the process of a species splitting into multiple species. For example, a few flies of the same species that arrived to Hawaii a few million years ago have split into several species now. And there are four methods by which speciation could happen. Allopatric speciation is the most common one. It's when a geographical barrier splits a population into two. For example, a river forms between them, and each new population slowly accumulates their own alleles. Since there is no gene flow between both populations, which means no one is crossing the river and mating with someone from the other population, each population is building up their own alleles, and eventually they become distinct enough to be considered different species. Parapatric speciation is when a few members of a population move away from their original homeland. They arrive at a new place, and like with allopatric speciation, they build up their own alleles and become a new species. Like those flies that moved to Hawaii, remember? Parapatric speciation is when some members of a population start doing different things. For example, there's a tortoise species, and some of them start eating grass instead of leaves. The ones who love grass now hang out in the grassy areas all the time, but the leaf eaters still live in the spots with trees. Now each group is only mating and reproducing with each other, cause they're getting isolated, right? Which means they start accumulating genetic mutations. Eventually, the original tortoise species will be split into two, grass eaters and leaf eaters. And finally, sympatric speciation is evolution just by chance. It's similar to genetic drift. For whatever reason or just by chance, some groups in the population start hanging out with each other more, and they don't mix as much with other groups. they start accumulating genetic mutations, of course, and become a new species. This is very unlikely, but as the number and diversity of species is very vast, it has happened occasionally. But how could speciation be possible? According to a very important law of biology, a member of a species cannot give birth to someone who is not of that species. But that's not how speciation works. Look at this red to blue transition. Is there any single place where the red becomes blue? No. So, like that in speciation, it's not that suddenly some creature gives birth to a creature of a different species. That's just not possible. It's a gradual change, like this. Even though there's no exact place where the red becomes blue, you can clearly see that at the top it's red and at the bottom it's blue. Similarly, Latin gave rise to many languages like Spanish and French and English, but is there any moment when a Latin speaker gave birth to a Spanish speaker? No, it's a gradual change again. That's like how evolution works. Evolution is always happening at a small and large scale, but sometimes it happens slowly and uniformly. This is called phyletic gradualism. But sometimes a species shows little evolutionary change over millions of years, but when its environment changes, the species rapidly changes in just a few thousand years. This is punctuated equilibrium. Overall, the kind of change that's happening to the environment really dictates whether a population is undergoing phyletic gradualism or punctuated equilibrium. If the environment stays stable for a long time, but then rapidly changes, of course, it's going to be punctuated equilibrium. But if the environment is changing slowly and uniformly, then the population will undergo phyletic gradualism. Alright, you have a basic grasp of evolutionary concepts by now. Let's go over some misconceptions that are commonly held about evolution. First thing, evolution is not a straight line. You might have seen this 20th century diagram of human evolution going from lowly ape to mediocre caveman to advanced human. But that is a big misrepresentation of evolution. But this is a big misrepresentation of human evolution and evolution in general. It's less like this, really, and more like this. You see, evolution isn't a straight line. It's more like a tree or a bush. There's a stem, a common ancestor. There's a stem, a common ancestor, which splits into multiple branches, and those branches split into more branches and so on. Sometimes, like branches connecting in a bush, species fuse, or in the case of some microbes, exchange genes. There's one huge evolutionary tree of life, since all life comes from a common ancestor. And within this tree, there are smaller trees, you notice, right? Every section on this evolutionary tree is like a tree or a bush in itself, like the human evolution tree I showed you a couple seconds ago. Second myth, evolution is not about advancement or progress. Evolution is just populations adapting to the environment by changing genetically. Humans aren't the peak of evolution or anything like that. There is no superior or inferior in evolution. Even if we're the most intelligent species, we are just one out of the trillions that exist on this earth. So there's also no forward or backward in evolution. It's all just change and adaptation. And finally, evolution is not a choice. It's not like a flying bird one day said, hey, I want my species to live in the sea, and then try to make his kids grow into penguins. Evolution only happens to populations. For example, humans are still evolving, and I'm pretty sure you haven't actually tried to make humans evolve into something. There is no goal in evolution. Alright, let's recap. We learned about punctuated equilibrium and phyletic gradualism, the types and process of speciation, genetic drift and bottleneck events. We learned why these myths are not true. Evolution is a straight line, evolution is about advancement and progress, and evolution is a choice. Alright, now you understand how evolution works in the real world. But are you wondering how we even know this happens? Well, we'll cover that in the third video of the Understanding Evolution series, which is linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Bye, see you next time!